Good evening. It's Wendy Hernandez with Command the Courtroom, and I want to welcome you to tonight's show. I have an amazing guest. I'm so excited that I just recently met her. But before I delve into my guest and all the wisdom that she has to offer, I want to give you guys my normal disclaimer, which is that I'm only an attorney in Arizona. I'm not licensed in any other state. If you have legal questions, then you need to consult with an attorney in your jurisdiction, wherever that is. And I know that we have watchers or followers all over the world. So consult with an attorney in your jurisdiction. And by all means, if you're in Arizona, then I'm available, so call the office and get a consult scheduled. This program is for educational purposes only. It does not constitute legal advice. And usually we have people on the chat. Remember, whatever you say on the chat is public. And if your ex is watching the show or watching the chat but not saying anything, potentially any negative comments that you put on the chat could be used against you in court. So be careful what you post. And just want to say hi to Brandon, hi, and the Tenacious Warrior. So let me get started and introduce you to my very special guest. Tonight, I am very excited to introduce you to Ann Blythe. And Ann is with Betrayal Trauma Recovery. And Betrayal Trauma Recovery is a daily online support group. And Ann has a lot of great wisdom to offer. So welcome, Ann. Thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you so much for having me, Wendy.
Oh, you're so welcome. The honor is mine. And we were chatting before we went live, and I have so much to learn from you. And I know that my watchers, followers have a ton to learn from you as well. There are a lot of people who watch the Command the Courtroom show who are dealing with abusive relationships or past abuse, childhood abuse. They're in relationships or were in relationships with narcissists. So I'm hoping you can shed some light on abuse and how people deal with it, especially in the context of co-parenting. So to delve in, can you just kind of quickly give us an overview of what abuse means? Because I think there's this perception in the world that abuse is really a physical thing or just bad emotional abuse. Is there another perspective that you have in terms of abuse?
Yeah, most people are not aware of the psychological abuse and the emotional abuse that I would say so many women experience. Now, at Betrayal Trauma Recovery, we speak in a gender segregated way because my organization only helps women victims of male perpetrators. So I want to just warn everyone that that's how I will be describing things this evening, even though I fully recognize that there are women abusers. So I just want to make that really clear. So you male victims out there, please don't feel left out by me using those pronouns. But because that's what we deal with all day, that's the way I speak. So a lot of people think of emotional abuse as screaming at someone or calling them names or swearing at them or just saying awful things to them. But there's this element of emotional and psychological abuse that is very tricky that most people can't see, that is extremely damaging. One of the things that is happens in this type of psychologically abusive situation is gaslighting, where someone tries to alter reality to match what they would like reality to be, but it's not the actual reality. So victims of this type of psychological abuse are very confused a lot of the time. They can't really figure out what is going on. They think it's their fault. They think that maybe if they were cuter or if they made dinner better or if they, did something, that things would change. And it's a very difficult place to be, because I think the number one reason that women don't get out of abusive relationships is because they do not know they are in one. And trying to figure out what is happening and if it's really abuse is difficult, especially when they go down different routes, like perhaps marriage counseling, where it's not identified, or maybe like a pornography addiction recovery route, where they take perhaps an addiction view of it rather than an abuse view of it, can be very confusing for victims. So The other thing to think about is that physical abuse does not happen in a vacuum. There is no one who has been physically abused that hasn't also been or been before abused emotionally and psychologically. There's never a time where physical abuse happens just by itself. It's always in conjunction with emotional and psychological abuse. And
Okay.
generally speaking, when it gets to physical abuse, that's like way extreme, and people can really be abused on the emotional and psychological levels with really deep wounds that people can't see. And so it's a lot harder to get help in that situation.
So, if somebody who's watching this interview suspects that maybe they're a victim of abuse, do you have recommendations in terms of what they should be doing, who they should be looking to maybe help them identify whether abuse is happening and then take the next steps? Because, you know, I think that my first step would be to go to a clergy man or woman, or to go to some sort of marriage counselor or some sort of therapist. Those would be my first steps. But I thought I just heard you say that maybe that may not be effective.
Yeah. We actually do not recommend marriage counseling when people are trying to determine if they're being abused. Um, the problem with marriage counseling is that both parties have to be equal in order for marriage counseling to work. So if one of the parties is lying and manipulating and engaging in emotionally and psychologically abusive behaviors, they're not going to be on an equal playing field. Someone is going to maintain more power. And the therapist can unwittingly be what we would maybe call a flying monkey, or someone who can accidentally enable the abuse and hurt the victim more. So on our website, btr.org, we have a checklist. If you go to btr.org/checklist, this checklist is for women who suspect that they might be in a psychologically or emotionally abusive relationship. And they can just go down that checklist and check off some of the things. The first one, for example, is to find a safe person to open up to. And we give a list of things that if people say these things to you, they're not safe. So you probably don't want to go to them. So one of the examples might be, oh, he just uses porn. That's no big deal. Everybody does that. The fact that you didn't know that he used porn for 20 years and he told you he wasn't, and now that you just found out you were lied to for 20 years and manipulated about this, no big deal, right? That would be an unsafe person. There are other examples on that checklist, and it takes you down the line of like where to go and what things to do to find out. Now, a lot of women are afraid to start down this path because they actually don't want to know. So many victims are in that scenario where they think, what will I do? What will I do for a job? We have children together. I don't know how to navigate this. And so they would rather consider that it's some other issue. For example, maybe the person has a personality disorder, or maybe they need medication, or perhaps they have an addiction that's not addressed, or some other reason. And what I always tell women is the cause does not matter to the victim. Even if it were the best reason in the world, let's say someone was in a car accident and they got a really bad brain lesion, and that brain lesion is now causing that person to engage in abusive behaviors. Now, that's a good reason, right? That person maybe can't control it. Maybe they, but that does not mean that you deserve to be abused. It also doesn't mean that that behavior is appropriate. It also doesn't mean that you can't take steps to get to safety. So to a person who is being emotionally or psychologically abused, I would like everyone to think it does not matter what the cause is. What matters is that you are safe.
Got it. That's really great advice. And I can tell you, I've had a couple of clients over the years who were in that situation that you just described, where the spouse was injured and in an accident, and then personality change, and they turned into an abuser, and they struggled with exiting the relationship because they thought, well, that's not really my spouse. I know who my spouse can be, and they have hope that the person might return to the person that they once were, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And that's really hard. There a lot of women also think like, well, I wouldn't want to be abandoned if I were having these, health problems or other things. But the thing that's the most important is their safety. And they need to remember that if they are being abused, it's going to harm them and their children. And getting to safety is the most important thing. You can always wait from a safe distance to see if that person is going to choose to get help. But even if someone has, a brain lesion, and they could get help, if they refuse to do that, then they're not going to get better. And that's not anything that you can have control over, unfortunately. And it's a really, really heart-wrenching situation for people.
Okay. Thank you for that. So on the topic of children, and I kind of want to make our way there because as I know, a lot of the material and content that Command the Courtroom does is related to children and co-parenting. But before we get to how does a person co-parent with an abuser, I want to talk a little bit about some of the effects that an abuse can have on a person. Because in scanning your website, I saw things come up that I've really never been aware of before. But when on reflection, I see how some of my clients have experienced these things that you described. So can you talk about specifically triggers and disassociation and how these happen from abuse and how they manifest in a victim's life?
Yeah. Now, before I talk about that really quickly, in addition to the checklist, we have a books page on our website. It's btr.org/books, where we have a number of vetted books on abuse that I really recommend that women read. The more you can get educated about what abuse is and how it works, the better you'll be at identifying it. So when women are abused, emotionally and psychologically, they don't act like a average person, right? Their abuser is unknowing to other people doing things that cause this person trauma. And they are not going to heal from that trauma until that abuse is stopped. And you can't control whether or not a person stops abusing you. In fact, so many of these abusers, the abuse escalates with divorce or after divorce. And you can only control how much access that you give your abuser to you. So starting to recognize, okay, how can I set some barriers around the harm to make sure that I'm not abused more? One of the examples we were talking about before we started this call is that a woman in court, for example, she might be in court and she might be hearing her abuser lie about her. She might be hearing him say, this is her fault. She's not a good mom. She abandoned the family, whatever it is, lies or gaslighting. They're actually the exact opposite of how it really happened. In that scenario, I don't think that judges, attorneys, witnesses recognize that they are watching her being abused in that very moment. That him saying that about her is the emotional abuse. That is the psychological abuse. And many times in a courtroom, that's when a woman really falls apart and she starts looking crazy because she's like, no, that's not true. And she starts getting, panicked and then the judge and the lawyers think, well, she's freaking out. This really must be her. Instead of recognizing we are currently witnessing an abuse episode. This is what it looks like. And this is what a normal person this is how a normal person would react to abuse. This is a normal reaction that we're witnessing. And that should be, I know this sounds weird, but proof in and of itself that she's an abuse victim. But so many people don't recognize it in that moment. And that's a really important thing for victims to recognize that she's going to be abused through that process, and to have a support team ready to help her out, whatever that looks like, to have some grounding exercises. We have 2 coaches at BTR that specialize in this. One is Coach Deborah, who helps women through the divorce process, not so much legally, but like navigating how are you going to set up your support team? What is that going to look like? And then another coach, Coach Renee, who is our crime specialist for if you need to report a crime, domestic violence, child pornography, sexual assault, things like that, that she can help you navigate your local resources. And you can set up schedule appointments with them at btr.org. But the important thing is that you get the resources you need. We also talked about before that women get really overwhelmed when they're having to deal with their abuser in terms of paperwork and things like that.
Mhm.
So I'd like to speak to that for just a moment. So in a legal case, you have to like keep track of all these papers, right? And document everything. And I know of one victim who had a domestic violence case, and she had all these papers piled up and she couldn't even go in that room. It was like just too much for her. So one of the things she did was she asked her sister to come over and organize it for her. And being aware of what your triggers are and what is difficult for you, and having, I will call it the humility to say, I can't process information right now. This is too difficult for me. Having someone come in and organize it for you and help you is really important. I know of another survivor right now who actually asked her sister to take your course.
Oh, that's
Because
awesome.
every time she tried to look at your videos, it was very traumatizing because she thought, I could lose in court. I could my kids. This is too stressful. So she asked her sister, will you take Wendy's course for me and help me organize these documents? And her sister did that for her. So Coach Deborah is really good at helping women identify what areas they're being triggered about. What are their problems? What are they unable to face right now? And instead of saying, which a lot of people say, and I don't think it's fair to victims, they say, well, you just need to be strong. You can get through this. You can do this. You can do this, right? I think victims need to hear, it's okay that you can't do this. How can we get you the help that you need right now? Because you're not a super person. Of course, you can't figure out how to get food on the table and help your kids and all of these other things when you're faced with so much trauma and stress.
I love that. I think it's difficult in a lot of cases for people to ask for help. And it may be even more difficult when they're in the situation. Maybe victims are afraid of appearing weak or feeling even weaker by asking for help. But, I agree with you that asking for help may be the most powerful thing that a person can do, especially in an abusive situation. And I do want to give a shout out to Digital Right. He's always giving great suggestions. And, I understand, Anne explained about the terminology thing, but I want to, I know that I have a lot of viewers out there who are guys who are abused by their former exes who are women. Mm-hmm. So I get that. And guys, don't be afraid to ask for help. So, Anne, I'm sorry, continue. Before we get to co-parenting, you wanted to talk about some of these other things. And I've had clients like you described either kind of fall apart on the stand or even just in the pretrial preparation phase when we're trying to get exhibits together or fill out forms, they just shut down. So if a person finds themselves in that situation, either pre-trial or while they're sitting there talking to the judge, do you have any suggestions about what they might do in the moment to pull themselves out, or is there nothing sometimes that a person can do?
I don't really think there's anything someone can do in the moment. If they have prepped and they've thought about it and considered that this is going to happen, then they can maybe do like a signal with their attorney, and someone can say, hey, you're looking like you're in trauma or something. And I don't know, I've never talked to an attorney about this. And so this is something that is really interesting to me. If an attorney could say, hey, can we take a break? My client is currently experiencing trauma symptoms, as you can see. Can we take a little break so she can get a drink of water or something like that and maybe help ground her a little bit? So in order to do that type of thing, a survivor or a victim has to be extraordinarily self-aware, which is extremely difficult. So this is the other unfortunate thing about abuse, putting that type of responsibility on a victim who just genuinely needs help is I think very onerous, rather than trying to be like, okay, how can all of us in this courtroom help this woman get through this?
Mm.
Everyone's saying, nope, you have to show up like this, you have to talk like this is what you have to do, and it's almost an extension of the abuse. We won't help you, and you
Ah,
won't get protected unless you do it a certain way and you say things a certain way, because that's actually what emotional and psychological abuse sounds like. I won't
ah,
love you unless you get a boob job, or unless you make dinner, or unless you do this or whatever. So that's also why it's really triggery for a victim when she's in a situation, perhaps with an attorney, when the attorney says, okay, you need to do this, this, and this. And she's like, I'm hiring you to help me rather than to like try and make it my fault still. Are you telling me that if I don't show up a certain way or say things the right way, that
yeah.
I'm still not going to be protected? And that's just an unfortunate reality that we all face. And I think the more victims can be educated about this, and their attorneys can be educated, and judges,
Yeah.
it will help a lot. But it is an insurmountable, I would say, problem in the court system right now.
Well, I can tell you, I feel somewhat embarrassed. I don't know what the right word is. Because I've done exactly what you're describing, to clients in the past, but it's because I guess I didn't know better. So I, as an attorney, I'm glad that you're on here because I'm learning that maybe I need to change some things about the way I am counseling clients who are in this situation. So, that's really great feedback. I appreciate that. And so you keep bringing up team. Who is on the team? Who can a victim be looking at to be on their team when they are, trying to build up and, get strong and get ready for a court battle?
The team needs to be pretty extensive, I would say. So you need a good attorney, but you also need a support system. So I have seen so many victims who are going through this think that justice will be served in court, for example, only to be absolutely devastated when things don't go the way that they thought that they should go. There is a army of women who have been through this, and a lot of them are members of our Betrayal Trauma Recovery Group, which is a daily online support group. We have multiple sessions a day in every single time zone. Some days we have up to 5 sessions a day. And so rather than using your attorney for your therapist or for your emotional support, which I think a lot of victims would like to do. They call them and they're like, am I going to win? How is this going to work? Are the things we're doing going to solve all my problems? That sort of a thing. And also being charged by the hour to do that, by a very expensive hourly rate. The Betrayal Trauma Recovery Group is only $125 a month for unlimited life support, and you can hop on at any time. So unlike perhaps when you might want to call like a therapist and you can't get in for 2 weeks, or you go to your clergy and your clergy says something like, are you praying?
Yeah.
Are you reading your scriptures? And you're like, yeah, I've been doing that a ton. Like I can't read them anymore. My eyes are going cross-eyed. You
Right.
genuinely need like trauma support. So that our Betrayal Trauma Recovery Group is a really good place to start for women who just need to get on and kind of process what they're going through. With people who really get it, they get it immediately. So many therapists we're finding they might go to a therapist only to have the therapist say, let's try to improve your communication. And perhaps your divorce might go better if you improve your communication, or let's try to improve the way you're presenting yourself, or other things like that, when no amount of improved communication is going to solve that. So being able to process all of that with a safe place where you don't have to explain what's happening to them, they can actually help you, is really good. So Betrayal Trauma Recovery Group is a great place to start. Again, for the men who are being abused, I apologize, but it is only for women victims. We wanted to make it a really safe place for women. I think other members of your team might be someone who can read legal documents for you. We have found that women in trauma have a difficult time reading and processing information. So for my organization, we have a podcast, And I have found that podcasting is a better way to get women in trauma information than, say, a blog or something that they have to read, because they can listen to it and perhaps listen to it more than once, and they get a little bit more out of that. I've had clients who have assigned like their sister or their mother or their best friend to read legal documents for them to help them to process that. So I would say someone who can help you with like tasks. In fact, the tasks like legal tasks or other types of tasks. Just, I would say when you're building your team, consider where you're having issues and then who you can outsource those things to. I think it's really important not to try and be a super person when you're in trauma, because then you're not going to do anything very well. You really need a lot more support than you would think.
I agree. I love scrolling Instagram. It's like my guilty pleasure. And the other day I saw like a video of this guy, and like the message across the top was, this is what happens when you try to do it yourself. So he had a backpack on, and he was like holding stuff under his arms and drinks in both hands. And so he's going out of a door, and the backpack got hung up on the door handle. And so then he's trying to, get out, and he starts dropping everything. And I think the point is he was just carrying too much on his own.
Mm-hmm.
And so many people do that. So whoever's out there listening, if you're, take a look at yourself, and are you carrying things that maybe somebody else could help you carry? And I think that's what Anne is trying to say. Like, you're not alone in this. You don't have to be alone.
No. I mean, you might feel like you're alone, but once you start trying to reach out, you will find people that can help you.
So is it possible to co-parent with your abuser?
I don't think so. That is my own personal opinion. I think it's possible to parallel parent with an abuser. But the problem with abuse is that it is a control and power issue. And so any little thing that an abuser can use to get under your skin, to kind of wield some power or control over you, or to toy around with your emotions, that is what they want to do. And you have to remember that you are their victim. Mm-hmm. Like, they enjoy, or they get some power, or they get some, if we're talking about narcissistic supply out of that conflict that you do not want to supply them with, right? Mm-hmm. So the name of the game is making sure that you are not giving that person supply in terms of adding to the drama or giving them what they want. There's a common saying that says, don't fight with the pig, you'll get dirty, plus the pig likes it, right? Like, that's the whole point with an abuser. They thrive on chaos and pain. And so in that scenario, any way that they can use to cause that in your life is going to be what they're going to use. So number one, eliminating every entry point that you can for that chaos and pain. So for example, if they're constantly texting you, one option would be to say, I'm going to block you on my phone. From now on, you can only email me at this email address. Or you have mentioned, or someone mentioned, Family Wizard. Mm-hmm. For example, I'm only going to message you through Family Wizard. I think Tina Swithin recommends only looking at it twice a week or something like that, and not turning on the notifications. So close off every single entry point that you can to the chaos and the pain, and then leaving the rest to just very gray rock. Is your audience familiar with gray rock?
Some of them might be, but I think you should talk about it again. It's important.
So gray rock is the most limited communication you can. That is absolutely the most boring thing possible. So if they go on a big rant, a 5-paragraph rant about all the things you're not doing or whatever, then you respond with only the actionable items that they require. So if they say something like, if something in that 5-paragraph rant says something like, I need to pick the kids up at 3:30, then you could write back, okay, pick up the kids at 3:30. That's the only thing you respond to. It is difficult to play gray rock for years and years and years and years and years and years. And it gets exhausting and it gets very tiring. I've worked with so many women who are just exhausted after doing this for years. But it is less exhausting than engaging in the chaos and getting cycled through that abuse more. I am of the opinion that if you're consistent about it, eventually it will get less and less and less over time. And I hope that that's the case. But I think the parallel parenting track where you just worry about what you do with your kids when they're with you, and then you allow your spouse, your ex-spouse, to do what he's going to do with the kids when they're with his time, that is really difficult to just let go and say, you know what, if he's going to feed him, ice cream at midnight, he's going to feed him ice cream at midnight. I'm not going to do that at my house, but I'm not going to engage with him about whether or not that's good for the kids or anything like that, because that's just a road to chaos.
So let me ask you this. What's coming to mind for a lot of my clients right now is, this COVID stuff, and people have differing viewpoints on masking versus not masking, gathering versus not gathering, and so COVID is something that has potentially life-threatening effects. So playing devil's advocate, are you saying, like, with parallel parenting, would you just say, I'm going to let it go and they're going to do what they're going to do in terms of this COVID, and I'm just going to have to be at peace? Is that what you're saying?
I would say that. I know that's really risky. The problem is anytime you open up a door to an abuser, they're going to shove their foot in there, right? So if they know that it's going to bother you a lot if they go to a big family event and you don't wear masks, let's just say, and you write and you say, hey, I'm really worried about this. The kids cannot wear masks. There's nothing you could do to enforce that. Right. You can't call the police and make them wear masks. I mean, maybe in some states right now, I guess they can break it up or whatever, but like, there's no legal way to enforce it. There's nothing to do about it. And so my contention would be, and I could be wrong, I could totally be wrong, but don't open the door for them to stick their foot in there. You just make sure, if you want your children to wear masks, you want them to be safe, you're not going to have a big, let's say, Thanksgiving gathering. You're just going to, do what you're going to do with your kids. And then when they go, that's up to them, because you just don't want to get in battles where you have no way of protecting your kids with some type of action. And all it does is it basically just shows your vulnerability, and they're going to love just, I can do what I want, and these are my kids, and it's my right to And I never want my clients or anyone who follows us to wittingly put themselves in the vortex of emotional and psychological abuse.
Okay, thank you for that. So a couple of things. One tip that you had mentioned when we were talking before the show was about, what possibly one of the members of your team helping you with the communication piece, if that is a trigger. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So are you talking about like third-party communication? Yeah. Okay. So many people are like, this is not working. Communicating with this person directly is chaos, and I can never. And also, maybe every time that even a text comes through, even if it's not from them, you'll find a trauma response, and you'll be responding to like, or the phone rings and you think, is it him? Is it him? So one of the things we really recommend is finding a member of your team, a father, a brother, a sister, a neighbor, someone who can intercept that communication for you so that you are able to block them on your phone, your email, other sort, I recommend that victims, when they're going through it, that they actually delete their social media. I recommend that they just completely start over so that they don't have any unsafe people on there that they forgot are unsafe, that people are connected. But that way, you're never going to get a text from your abuser. You're never going to get an email from your abuser. Well, you could if they email you from a different email, I guess, or a different phone number. But that will reduce your stress and anxiety about your phone, because so many women are just like freaked out about their phone, that will significantly reduce it. The other thing that happens when you use a third party is that person can read that. I'll maybe call it a 5-paragraph rights manifesto. Let's say it's some sort of manifesto where they're saying, I am entitled to these things and you're ruining my life, and whatever. And the person
I've seen it.
Yeah, the person can read it for you,
Yeah.
and just give you a synopsis of what it is. And some people are really concerned. They're like, well, what if I miss something important or whatever? It's okay. It's okay. It's your ex-husband. It's your ex-wife. It could be something important, but the likelihood of it being super important is very low. If you trust the person that is your third party, they can read, they'll probably pick up on the thing that's important. And of course, some things might get lost in the shuffle, but the most important thing is your safety. And we have found that women who can stop that constant trauma response can actually start to heal, and then they just have some peace in their home, on their phone, and they can start to heal. That makes you seem less crazy in court, I assure you, when you're not constantly being barraged. One of the things that a narcissist will do is just try to dysregulate you as much as possible so that you're confused and so that you sort of break down, and they want you to be like that. And so if you cut off communication with them, you're going to heal much faster than if you allow them in your space.
I got to tell you, I had an experience with an attorney within the last couple of years who I'm convinced suffered from NPD. And these, 5-paragraph manifestos, I would get like 4 times a day. And it was, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't function. It was traumatizing for me as an attorney. So I can't imagine what it would be like for somebody who's in relationship and sharing children with a person like this. But I love, what you're talking about here. Unfortunately, I had to continue to communicate with this person. And there are some situations where judges mandate that parents give each other updates once a week, that they exchange emails. What are your thoughts on that? How can an abuse survivor successfully navigate that, especially when they're trying to, distance themselves and start healing?
I think that is the unfortunate current situation with the court system, that these co-parenting situations are causing more trauma for the victims and they're not being protected. So I would say, number one, it's unfortunate that ever happens. But because that is the reality of the situation, I think that can still happen through a third party. You can still send an email to someone giving them an update of what happened that week. You can still say, you can send me the update through that third party. And as long as you can maintain that communication and you can show that you respond, that your third party responds back to the emails, that they communicate well. I don't know what that would do in court. But I find it, and maybe you can speak to this a little bit. I find it interesting that a judge would force someone to talk to someone directly when they're telling them this way of communicating is working all right, and I have a history of abuse. Would you say that judges will say, we don't really care, you have to anyway? And how would they force someone to do that? Can a judge actually force someone to talk to somebody?
So what I've seen are court orders that mandate usually a written communication. It's not usually a verbal communication, but, once a week on Sunday by 6 p.m., the parents shall exchange emails which update one another on what's happening with the kids while in their care. So I've seen a lot of, it's like a boilerplate order that I see. I won't say that I see it in cases where there's abuse and the judge actually believes there's an abuse. But I will say, Anne, that there are a lot of cases where parties are saying I'm abused and, the judge doesn't buy into it. So then those orders are later made. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think It's a really tough situation. Lundy Bancroft, who is an expert on abuse, I always recommend people read his book. Why does he do that? He has another one called When Dad Hurts Mom, about custody situations. He always says don't even bring up abuse in a court situation, because sometimes it just makes the judge frustrated and mad and think, she's just bringing this up because she wants to get an advantage or something like that, which is unfortunate. I don't know how to navigate this. So I'm actually excited to have you on my podcast to talk
Okay.
about this and some other legal experts, because this is a really, really tricky situation right now in family court. And victims, I can say, I've talked to hundreds of them. They are really frustrated and scared, and going to court terrifies them because they are just like, how do I protect myself in this scenario, especially if the people who are supposed to help me protect myself are making decisions that further put me in harm's way. And a lot of us don't know the answers to these questions right now, and so many victims are not getting the help that they need from the legal system.
Yeah, it's difficult. It's really difficult. That's part of the reason why I started doing the little Command the Courtroom videos, because I knew there were so many people out there who just were lost and didn't know how to navigate the family court system and didn't have an attorney for whatever reason. So hopefully, the videos help people, and I look forward to being on your podcast. So, I recognize that there might be some third parties out there who are on a survivor's team, and they are watching this video right now, or they're consuming your content or Command the Courtroom's content. How can a third party who's supporting a victim best support that person? Like, do you have ideas, suggestions, books to read, things to not say?
Yeah. So I'll refer back to the checklist I talked about. So check that out. It's btr.org/checklist. And also the books on our books page. So btr.org/books. Both of those are great resources. One of the things that's really important for third-party helpers to remember is that any indication that this is her fault in any way, shape, or form is going to trigger her. She's going to have a traumatic response. And the reason why that is because he has abused her by telling her that the reason he treats her the way he does is because of how she acts. So anytime anyone's like, well, did you say the right thing? Did you say it in the right way or whatever? That is actually an extension of the abuse. So when people think, oh, I'm just trying to help her so she shows up the right way, in court or whatever, they are not seeing that as like, that is an extension sometimes of that abuse. So the third party helpers knowing that literally there are women out there who are not well spoken. They're not very smart. They don't comb their hair. They don't wear makeup. They look terrible, and they're just a mess, whose husbands dearly love them. And who have really good friends who absolutely love them, and they're not being abused. So there isn't anything that this woman could do to make it so she's not abused. Similarly, there's really nothing that she could do to stop the abuse from happening besides legal action, all the things we're talking about. So when she says stuff that doesn't make sense to you, like, and let me think of what some of those would be, like, well, maybe I'm not good enough, or I don't think I can do this, or, there's so many things she's going to say. Instead of thinking that it's her talking, I would like these third parties to remember this is the abuse talking. She still has this abusive voice in her head. She's going to have it for quite some time. Healing takes a while. And to know that she might say, well, I don't know if, divorce is going to be good for me. I don't know if whatever it is. To think rather than, man, she's kind of crazy, or she doesn't get this or whatever. Just think this is the abuse talking, and she can't hear her own voice yet. And I'm going to love her. I'm going to tell her that she's brave. I'm going to tell her I'm there for her, and that we will support her, and that it will, we'll go through it with her. So many victims who have that team who say, you know what? Don't worry about groceries. I mean, that's really difficult, right? I'm not saying that just throw that out the window, but I
Yeah.
will buy your groceries for the next 3 weeks. So you just don't have to worry about that or whatever it is they can say instead of saying things like, well, you're going to have to figure that out. Right? Like this is divorce. You're just going to have to do this. A third party person saying you're brave, you're strong, and we will help you get through this is what a victim really needs to hear.
Oh, that's excellent. So I have a question, and this kind of applies, really for me and any other attorneys out there who might be watching. So there are laws, and sometimes there are hard truths that I have to share with the client about the law that might apply to their case, or about a judge, or a judge's inclination or a judge's bias. And as an attorney, I feel like I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't share that. I'd be setting my client up for feeling like they get hit or going to get hit or got hit by a bus if I didn't disclose this information. So, is there a way to temper those hard truths that sometimes have to be shared, against the fact that my client is, a survivor? And how can I make them feel like I'm not attacking them by sharing these things? Does that make sense?
Mhm. I think you just did it right now.
Yeah.
The way you
Okay.
did it right now is to say, I understand this is not your fault. I understand that this is what the abuse sounded like, that
Mhm.
you were made to manage everything that he did. And when you didn't do it right, you were blamed. And here we are trying to get you to manage the situation and telling you if you don't manage it this way, it's going to go badly. That sounds like a threat, right? So I understand that this sounds like the same thing to you. Being very careful about recognizing and saying it in that way, I actually think it would help her realize what happened to her. I think she'd be able to say, "Oh, this is different because my attorney actually really cares about me. The
Mhm.
reason why she's sharing these truths with me is because she genuinely wants to help me. Whereas the reason why my abuser was sharing his truths, and I'm going to put those in quotes, you're a bad person, you're a bad mom, no one would want you, whatever it is they're saying, is to control me and to put me down.
Mm.
And my attorney wants to build me up. And if you can let her know that that is what your goal is, I want to build you up. You are brave. You have been through so much already. I don't want to see you go through any more. I know this isn't your fault. I know this is what it sounded like. Here are some difficult realities that are unfair, but this is the current situation in the legal system, and we have to work within this framework. Um, I think that is the best way to approach it, but again, it's going to be difficult. And I think the other thing is if you see them have an emotional reaction, to say, I can see that this is difficult for you. I'm so sorry. Give them some time and just listen to them and don't be like, hey, calm down, like,
Yeah.
give them time to be emotional and say things like, it makes total sense that you would react this way. I mean, so many people are expecting victims to be like robots. They're thinking, well, he's punching you in the face and you need to be like, well, because he's crazy and abusive, it shouldn't hurt. It's going to hurt no matter what. And she would be weird if she didn't react. So acknowledging that, like, this is such a hard situation. And if you weren't emotional, you would be weird. So congratulations, you're normal is a
Oh,
good way to go.
wow. This is such great advice. I really, really appreciate it. And so I'd love for you to share with my viewers more about how they can take advantage of your online community. And again, run it past them what the program entails. And, if they're questioning, if they're asking themselves, should I reach out? Can you say something to those people who are maybe at the end of their rope?
Yeah. So I have a podcast. It's available on Apple Podcasts and other major podcasting apps. It's called Betrayal Trauma Recovery. You can find it just by searching on podcasts. I'd say that's a really good place for people to start. It helps women give it helps victims have the words to describe what is happening when they know what gaslighting is, when they've heard these other stories. I have a lot of victims on the podcast that share their story, and when they hear it, they're usually like, "Oh, that happened to me. This is exactly what happened to me." It's really interesting because abusers seem to all read the same manual. They're all very, very similar. So even though the details are different, it really helps women to recognize that, like, oh, this, I'm not weird. This is what happens. So the podcast, I would say, is a great place to start. Talking to an actual person and getting the support that you need, and have somebody tell you, you are not crazy. This sounds completely normal. You're reacting normal, is also super important. So that's the Betrayal Trauma Recovery Group, which is our daily online group, multiple sessions a day, every single time zone. You don't have to get childcare. You don't have to make an appointment. You can do it in your closet. You can, with your kids, you can, put on a TV show, go in your closet. If your kids need help, you can just step out for a minute, help them go back in your closet or wherever is a private place for you. So that works really well. Every single one of our coaches has a session on the group, so you'll meet all of them. And then a lot of women want to set individual sessions with those coaches to process things in a more private way. And so you can also do individual sessions with those coaches, and everything is on Zoom. We did this long before COVID, which was really cool because we were just all ready to go. But we have found that victims have a hard time getting out of the house, making appointments, putting their pants on, all kinds of stuff like that. So we really set this up to make sure that it was accessible to women who are in trauma. So our website is btr.org for Betrayal Trauma Recovery. That's btr.org. And our services has those services that I just talked about. And we also have those resources pages like the podcast and the books page and other resources that women can find there.
So that wonderful. Thank you so much, Anne. So you guys, I know that I'm going to go download that checklist because I'm certain that I could improve the way that I am dealing with this pervasive issue that I think a lot of people just don't get is happening in the legal system. So the checklist sounds awesome. The list of books sounds amazing. And the programs that are available, I think those are great. So I want to give a shout out to a few people. Of course, a Tenacious Warrior. She's my trusty sidekick, and she's always helping support me and contributing to the conversation. Jules, all the way from Australia. I'm happy to see you. Raul, always here too. Digital Right. Thank you for your wonderful questions. Brandon is always here as well. You guys, thank you. Thank Anne. She was a wonderful guest, and I hope that you'll come back again sometime, Anne, and share more of your wisdom. I'd love to have you.
I would love to come back. Thank you so much, Wendy.
Thank you. So you guys, no show next week because it's Thanksgiving week, but you're all in my thoughts and heart. And I will see you the week after Thanksgiving. I hope you guys enjoy your time with your families. Be safe. Take care of yourselves. And remember to get out there and command the courtroom, y'all. Okay? Talk to you later. Love ya. Bye.